Hello there, you aspiring audiovisual essayist. As school's out, no, not for summer, but for lockdown, and as we increasingly turn to our digital tools for communication and the dissemination of knowledge, what better way to climb the mountain of videographic criticism than this audiovisual essay, seminar, lecture thingamajig itself? In other words, using the audiovisual medium to learn about videographic criticism and audiovisual essays. So let's not get caught up in the semantics here and dive straight into it. I know you have already submitted your project 2s, but I want to dedicate this audiovisual seminar thingamajig to a topic that will hopefully transition our thinking to more audiovisual terms. This is visualizing and audiovisually representing concepts, ideas, and notions. So if this would be our hypothetical crisis bubble, COVID-19 would definitely be in it. But down with the realm of infectious diseases and going into the realm of academia, our poor old friend, the humanities, would also find itself in it. And while the coronavirus might be slowly oozing out of the bubble, the humanities is there to stay. Well, we're here to change that. Why is the humanities in a crisis? A great question, but to be explored another time. The point is that the audiovisual medium is also a vital tool for the humanities and of course other academic disciplines to disseminate and propagate its knowledge. The audiovisual essay then becomes a pedagogical tool to enlighten, educate, and transfer knowledge. This essential element of the attribute of the audiovisual essay primarily stems from the notion that we, as humans, are strong audiovisual learners, as that is how we perceive reality. So, for example, when using Gilles Deleuze's concept present in his cinema books for your theoretical framework in your audiovisual essay, why not use a simplistic visual aid to help in your essay's comprehension? So, just take this quote by Suyata Murthy about the diasporic optic, for example. I use this insight to forward a diasporic optic, a way of seeing that underscores the interstice, the spaces that are and fall between the cracks of the national and the transnational, as well as other social formations. If the community imagined by the diaspora is transnational in scope and produces a subject position that lays claim to and negotiates between multiple affiliations, the diasporic optic seeks to reveal this desire for multiple homes through specific representational strategies. Indeed, the diasporic optic she is talking about makes complete sense, but since her argument is highly focused on spatiality and ways of comprehending cultural spaces of belonging, it would be more powerful in terms of comprehension to create some sort of audiovisual diagram that visualizes that interstice. In doing so, you create many layers of the same argument and meaning that are represented through different channels, the audiovisual diagram, the voiceover during the diagram, and Murthy's quote. This is just one way you can represent concepts in your audiovisual essay, through simple, digitally generated examples, which involves digitally generated shapes and/or animations on a 2D plane. And to elucidate how it works to an even greater degree, here is yet another vertiginous quote by cultural theorist Homi Bhabha, made more comprehensive through the audiovisual language. What is theoretically innovative and politically crucial is the need to think beyond narratives of originally and initial subjectivities, and to focus on those moments or processes that are produced in the articulation of cultural differences. These in-between spaces provide the terrain for elaborating strategies of selfhood, singular or communal, that initiate new signs of identity, and innovative sites of collaboration and contestation in the act of defining the idea of society itself. And indeed, it might be difficult to understand what he means by in-between spaces and how it gives rise to new signs of identity. So, transforming Bhabha's metaphysical concept, a concept that actually does not have a corresponding tangibility to the audiovisual, lays out the importance of those in-between spaces, spaces that cannot really be concrete through the written language. It is important to note that these audiovisual transformations of concepts do not act as a strict quotation. They demonstrate your ability to understand theoretical notions and somewhat paraphrase them to an audiovisual product. Here is yet another example from Wisecrack that visually creates some sort of timeline and semiotics, from Saussure's thinking to Derrida's.
Philosopher Jacques Derrida was inspired by Saussure, but had some problems with his work. Because in Saussure's model, in spite of the complicated way meaning was constructed, it was still conveyed pretty seamlessly. I write dog, you say the word dog in your head, and conjure an image.
It indeed economizes your argument, as instead of using words to showcase the transition of semiotic thought, you visually represent them. Moving on, you can also represent concepts and notions through actual tangible means, through simple handcrafted examples. So this is Kevin Beeley's The Essay Film, Some Thoughts of Discontent, and let's see how it differs with the digitally generated examples. The first thought that comes to mind is that using actual props makes concepts even more tangible as they feature real-life objects. Handcrafted examples add more to the tactility of the audiovisual essay, where we can relate to everyday objects. They can also be more instructive as they resonate more with the traditional lecturer-student model, where we can somewhat sense Lee behind the camera disseminating his knowledge to us. Indeed, they are harder to manipulate when it comes to movement as opposed to data on your editing software, but that can provide a window for creativity when doing simple animations to represent concepts. For example, using stop motion, and in this case, bringing the paper effect as Lee does in his video. Going even further than these simple examples would be to create your own diegetic world that utilizes advanced animation. Say you want to analyze a socio-political documentary about Soviet state media through the lens of Noam Chomsky's concepts on ideology and its channeling through mass media. Indeed, you can execute Chomsky's concepts through simple, digitally generated examples, but to concretely and concisely exhibit their mechanisms, creating a 3D diegetic world with actors goes a step further. In other words, it becomes even more relatable to the viewer as they can perceive animated actors functioning under the ideology of mass media. I hope you are now getting somewhat of a feel on how we can use aesthetics and style to create a visualized concept, but we also need to utilize formal elements to visualize meaning. In other words, we can use already conceived signs and the conglomeration within all these styles to aid in the creation of meaning for the concept. What I mean with all of this is using shapes and forms to visualize analysis and reasoning, which are paramount to any argumentation. For example, you can use arrows to show causal reasoning, circular reasoning, and dialectics, Venn diagrams to showcase comparisons, lines to show linear temporality and connections, and intersections to show a common point. These can help represent connections and relations between concepts visually, and will boost your academic credibility within your audiovisual essay. We can also create forms that tacitly imply meaning for your argumentation that stem from the film itself. A good example would be executing Eisenstein's technique of intellectual montage to achieve a synthesis from two separate entities. The Repo Man audiovisual essay made by Dr. Kisanai clearly demonstrates the fusion of meaning that the film exhibits through a superimposition. You can also use a split screen in this case, but superimposing two frames together highlights the connection in a more visually punning manner as opposed to the split screen. In doing so, it adds another visual layer to the argumentation which can increase the comprehensibility of the connection. Another good simple example that uses images found outside the film itself is from Then and Now's Bourdieu, Cultural Capital, The Love of Art and Hip Hop. Then and Now looks into Bourdieu's concept of how cultural and social structures become ingrained within us through our social environment in our own minds. And to represent this dichotomy of our social environment and our own individual being, he juxtaposes two images, the school and the brain, through a superimposition. This can also be achieved through sound, where you can talk about industrialization as a concept and put sounds of a train, for example. It also works with the thesis-antithesis method we were talking about during the last physical seminar, but this time it is synthesized through an image and not merely the audiovisual essay itself. Associative thinking mentally challenges your audience to think, as it can act as a visual aid, which is a useful pedagogical method. It stirs up knowledge within them and guides them to deconstruct visual meaning. So now we have reached the culmination of the audiovisual essay. So taking everything we have previously learned, what would an academic audiovisual essay look like? Let's deconstruct it. So taking the general rule of argumentation, P, point, explanation, evidence, now we can put the pieces of the puzzle together using all what we have learned. You can, for example, first posit your hypothesis or thesis statement and key statements using text on the screen during the introduction of your audiovisual essay. Then you can move on to explaining the concepts through your theoretical framework, and this is where you can utilize today's knowledge to represent concepts and notions. Finally, you have the filmic analysis where you provide evidence through your primary sources, which are the films, and your secondary sources, which corresponds to your literature. It is important to note that this is merely a guideline and that in reality, you'll probably be ping-ponging between the different steps, as you can also elucidate concepts during your filmic analysis and quote secondary sources during the theoretical framework section. So to demonstrate how to create such visualizations on screen, I would like to show you how we can create and animate some sort of causal diagram. Suppose you would like to represent the film historical and stylistic evolution of classic Hollywood, French New Wave, and then New Hollywood. So I would imagine having a frame composed of three circles that demonstrate some sort of connection and causality between the three movements. So I would add circles that denote the styles with canonical films masked within them and bring them on screen in conjunction with the voiceover. I would then list and dictate some important features that would be explored in more detail later on in the audiovisual essay within these circles. To clearly mark French New Wave as a reaction in opposition to classical Hollywood, I would put a sign that makes it more comprehensible. I would then add lines that demonstrate how New Hollywood is a reaction and synthesis of these two styles. So before jumping into the demonstration, I just want to tell you that I am going to be using Final Cut Pro as I do not have Premiere, but I will also tell you how to execute each step on Premiere after I've done so on Final Cut Pro. So we first want to place all the elements within the timeline as if it would be the final product to foresee how our final diagram and frame would be. I already have created this background in advance, and obviously you can use whatever design and background you like. So to create the circles on Final Cut Pro, simply go to the Titles and Generators browser on the left side of the program, go down to Elements, and drag shapes to the timeline. So over here, I'm just moving them around, ensuring that they are in the right places, scaling them off a bit so they fit in the frame, and changing the frame color, etc. through the Effects window on the right where you can access your manipulation tools. Unfortunately, I won't be placing the films in the circles as that is a technique we will learn next week, so the circles will remain empty for now. To add the circles in Premiere, make sure the Title Tools window is available on the right. If not, you can go to Window on the top toolbar and click on Title Tools. It will then appear on the right toolbar, and you can choose the shape that you want. In this case, we want the circle. We can simply click it and go to our playback window and draw the shape. We can alter the parameters in the window where we can alter the movement. We then want to create the titles and lists. We covered that during our last seminar, and I've already placed them here. I'm just also moving these around, ensuring that they are placed correctly. Then we want to add the lines and the opposition sign. We can easily add a rectangular shape for the lines, which we can manipulate in order to make it look like a line. So I'm just playing with that a bit, ensuring that the line fits between the circles. As for the opposition symbol, you can simply download that from Google Images and place it into your timeline. You can also go to your advanced keyboard on your desktop if you are using a Mac and click on the Show Emojis and Symbols button. You can easily find more specific symbols and add them to your text box. On Windows, I believe you can easily search for the character map on your main search bar and you will have similar symbols available to you. Now that we have everything laid out, we can finally manipulate the animations, and that is nothing new as we covered that during the first seminar. So I will just quickly go through that here. I'm animating the first two circles in conjunction with the titles to ensure that they move in unison. I then want to animate the opposition sign, and I have decided to fade that in using the opacity tool, which controls the transparency of your element. Just go to when the element starts and add a keyframe and set the opacity to 0, and then move down a couple of frames and increase the opacity to 100. The software will automatically add the second keyframe for you. As for the lines, we can just add keyframes to the crop tool. For the sake of continuity and symmetry, make sure that the two lines have the same keyframes at the same positions. Then I would like to bring in the third circle and its respective title, and I would also like to fade that in while the lines are coming down from the other two circles, and in order to do that, we have to manipulate the opacity once again. It is important to note that the structure and chronology of the animations highly depends on the structure of your voiceover, so please take that into consideration while animating. And voila! There you have it. A simple diagram that somewhat creates a general overview of a hypothetical comparative filmic analysis. Good luck, aspiring audiovisual essayist.